Before we begin tonight's long and relaxing journey across 1,000 years of medieval royalty, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss another calm history story. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know where this peaceful journey is reaching. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let's drift slowly into the quiet world of kings, queens, and forgotten kingdoms. As the soft veil of evening settles across your quiet space, imagine the world as it once was, far older, slower, and touched by the deep stillness of time. Long before the rush of modern life, before engines and electric lights, before cities grew upward into steel and glass, there stretched the vast and wandering landscape of the medieval world. It was a world measured not by minutes or hours, but by the slow turning of seasons, the rise and fall of dynasties, and the gentle passing of generations. And across this long stretch of 1,000 years, the halls of medieval royalty echoed with whispered secrets, shifting alliances, quiet triumphs, and endless attempts to hold on to power in a world that refused to remain still. The story of medieval royalty does not begin with a single king or queen, but rather with a fading empire. When the last lights of Rome dimmed, the lands it once held were left in a quiet uncertainty, as though the world had exhaled and paused, unsure of what might follow. In that long pause, new kingdoms began to take shape like gentle waves rolling across a deserted shore. Little by little, leaders stepped forward, some chosen by birth, others by chance, and still others by the unpredictable pull of fate. Their crowns were not always made of gold. Sometimes they were woven from influence, fear, or the quiet respect of those who sought stability in a changing landscape. And it was from these shifting foundations that medieval royalty began its long journey through the centuries. In the early medieval world, power did not always look grand. Royal courts were simpler, quieter, and often much colder than the gilded images we imagine today. Firelight flickered against stone walls, illuminating faces that carried both the weight of responsibility and the weariness of endless decision-making. Travel was slow, letters took months to arrive, and news moved like a soft whisper carried by the wind. Yet in these slow rhythms of life, a certain stillness prevailed, a stillness that makes the era feel almost dreamlike when we look back across the 1,000 years that separate us from it. This stillness, this gentle pace, is what allows us to drift so easily into the world of medieval royalty tonight. As the centuries unfolded, each kingdom developed its own character, shaped by landscape, weather, tradition, and the quiet preferences of the rulers who guided them. Some lands were marked by rolling hills and peaceful rivers, lending their royalty a gentler touch, while others rose from jagged mountains or windswept plains, forging rulers whose strength came from endurance and resilience. No two courts were the same, yet they were connected by a shared desire to preserve order in a world where chaos was never more than a season away. And as their stories unfolded, they wove together something vast and intricate, an entire millennium of intertwined families, treaties, marriages, betrayals, and fragile hopes. In those early centuries, being a ruler meant living in a constant balance between uncertainty and hope. The past lay behind like a long shadow, and the future stretched ahead like a fog-covered forest path, revealing only small sections at a time. Every decision mattered, and every misstep lingered. Yet within this uncertainty, there was also something profoundly human. Moments of stillness, moments of reflection, moments when a king or queen might stand at a window, looking out over their lands, wondering what the years ahead might bring. Those moments, quiet and unseen, shaped the world as surely as battles and councils did. And it is in those subtle, timeless moments that the heart of medieval royalty truly lives. As you settle deeper into this calm historical journey, imagine the distant sound of a church bell echoing across a valley, its slow tolling marking not just the passing of an hour, but the unfolding of an era. Life moved gently, steadily, almost like the rhythm of a soft lullaby. People rose with the sun, worked beneath its path, and returned to the safety of firelight as twilight returned each evening. Rulers, too, lived within this rhythm. Even the greatest kings and queens could not escape the slow pull of time, the turning of seasons, or the quiet questions that came with leadership. This shared human experience connects us to them across the centuries, allowing their world to drift into ours with a calming familiarity. As we drift further into this long and quiet millennium, imagine the early courts settling slowly into place, across the patchwork of emerging kingdoms. Their banners, often simple and hand-stitched, hung from wooden beams or stone battlements that had only recently risen above the surrounding villages. The symbols on these banners, lions, eagles, stags, crosses, carried meanings that were understood not just by the nobles who designed them, but also by the farmers, craftsmen, and travelers who sought reassurance in these familiar signs of leadership. They were more than decorations. They were gentle reminders that someone, somewhere, was watching over the shifting world, trying to maintain balance in a time that could so easily tip into uncertainty. Inside these early royal halls, life unfolded with a steady and unhurried rhythm. Fireplaces crackled softly in the background, their warmth slowly drifting through corridors that often remained cold despite the flames. Candles flickered, casting long shadows against uneven stone walls, and the quiet murmur of advisors discussing matters of grain, border disputes, or alliances drifted like a low hum through the air. There were no clocks to divide the day into precise segments, no mechanical noise to interrupt the flow of thoughts. Decisions were made slowly, carefully, and often with long pauses, as rulers weighed the consequences that might ripple outward for generations. Royalty in these centuries did not enjoy the instant authority we might imagine. Their influence was woven gradually through gestures of generosity, quiet promises, symbolic rituals, and the steady cultivation of trust. A ruler might visit distant villages not as a grand spectacle, but as a gentle presence offering reassurance, listening to concerns, and reminding people that the crown was not simply a distant institution, but a guiding figure who shared part of their world. These journeys, slow and deliberate, were as important as any decree, for they stitched together the fragile fabric of early medieval society with threads of familiarity and respect. The farther we travel along this timeline, the more we feel the weight of the landscapes themselves, mist-covered forests stretching toward distant horizons, narrow dirt roads winding through quiet valleys, and small wooden bridges crossing streams that shimmered softly beneath early morning light. These places shaped royal life as much as any political decision. A kingdom bordered by dense forests might cultivate rulers who leaned upon the wisdom of hunters and scouts. A kingdom built around fertile riverbeds encouraged rulers who valued agriculture and careful distribution of resources. Geography, in this slow and subtle era, served as both a teacher and a silent advisor. With each generation, the idea of royalty became a little clearer, a little more structured. Ceremonies developed, roles solidified, and traditions were passed along like cherished heirlooms, carrying the soft murmur of ancestors who had once stood in the same halls, facing similar uncertainties. The coronation of a new king or queen became a moment of both celebration and reflection, a delicate balance between honoring the past and stepping cautiously into the future. Even in these grand moments, the atmosphere remained anchored in a gentle solemnity, reminding everyone present that power, no matter how great, was always temporary, a borrowed responsibility that must be carried with quiet dignity. Beyond the walls of the royal courts, life continued at a pace that was steady and predictable. Villagers tilled fields, herded animals, and shared stories by firelight. Monks in remote monasteries copied manuscripts by hand, their slow and meticulous work preserving knowledge that might otherwise vanish into obscurity. Traders traveled from town to town, carrying whispers of distant lands and unfamiliar customs. And throughout all this, the presence of royalty lingered like a distant, steady heartbeat, a reminder that however large or unfamiliar the world seemed, there was a structure holding it together. As the centuries rolled forward, communication remained slow, and this slowness acted almost like a natural filter, preventing sudden changes from sweeping too quickly across the land. News travelled on horseback or by messenger, and sometimes entire seasons passed before a kingdom learned of an event that had taken place beyond its borders. In this unhurried environment, decisions took on a deep sense of contemplation. A treaty was not simply signed, it was considered, discussed, re-examined, and eventually marked with quiet ceremony. A marriage between royal families was not merely a union, it was a long conversation between histories, hopes, and unspoken expectations. Every act carried a weight that could not be rushed. Within royal families, life moved with a delicate balance of duty and introspection. Children born into these households were taught from an early age that their futures were intertwined with the future of the kingdom itself. Their lessons were not always loud or forceful. Many were shaped by soft conversations with tutors, long hours spent observing court proceedings, or quiet moments watching the landscape from high windows. Through these small and steady experiences, they learned what it meant to become a ruler, not through displays of power, but through a calm awareness of responsibility. The slow unfolding of medieval royalty's first centuries feels almost like the gradual turning of a page in a massive, ancient book. Each detail, each decision, each relationship forms a thread in a tapestry that stretches across the entire millennium. As you imagine these early rulers stepping carefully through their halls, consulting with trusted advisors, or sitting in reflective silence beside a window that looked out over their lands, you may notice a sense of calm settling in. This world, though distant and filled with its own quiet complexities, invites a kind of peaceful curiosity, an invitation to drift gently through time, observing without urgency, understanding without haste. And so, as we continue our slow glide across this thousand-year landscape, let the quiet rhythm of early medieval royalty guide you deeper into rest, as though the very pace of history itself has softened its stride, allowing the centuries to unfold like a long, soothing exhale. As the early medieval world continued to shape itself, the sense of quiet endurance that settled over the kingdoms became almost like a second atmosphere, soft, persistent, and ever-present. You can imagine the slow drift of clouds across a dim afternoon sky, the faint rustle of wind passing through half-bare trees, and the distant echoes of footsteps along a castle corridor where each sound grew softer with distance. Life in these centuries pressed forward gently, touching each village, town, and hall with an unhurried hand, as though time itself wished to move carefully, aware of how delicate the balance of the world truly was. Within the royal courts, even the architecture reflected this calm persistence. Stone walls, though rough and uneven, carried a quiet strength. Wooden beams, darkened by years of smoke from hearth fires, gave a sense of stability and permanence. Tapestries hung in long, patient folds, telling stories that stretched back before living memory. Stories of long-lost battles, distant ancestors, mythical creatures, and victories that had shaped the kingdom's identity. These woven scenes were more than decorations. They were silent teachers, reminders of the road already travelled, and gentle anchors for the rulers who stood before them. A king or queen of this early era often found themselves contemplating these ancient threads in the late hours of the night, long after the day's discussions had ended and the hall had fallen into a hush. In those quiet moments, the burdens of leadership became clearer, not heavy with frantic urgency, but steady in their weight, asking to be carried with thoughtfulness rather than haste. The burdens, the flickering light of a single candle, might illuminate the soft lines of their face as they reflected on the future. Each breath slow and deliberate, each decision unfolding in the mind like a ripple across still water. These rulers, though set apart by title, were still deeply connected to the world beyond their walls. They listened to the steady rhythms of harvests and winters, relied upon the wisdom of elders who remembered earlier hardships, and felt the subtle shifts of the seasons just as their people did. The early medieval era was not marked by bold leaps forward, but by gradual steps that built upon the quiet choices made in moments rarely recorded. In this stillness, a foundation was laid, one that would support the more complex, more crowded, and more interconnected centuries yet to come. Travelers who journeyed from one kingdom to the next often brought stories that drifted slowly into royal awareness. A wandering monk might speak of a distant river frozen later than usual, hinting at changes in the climate. A trader might share tales of a town preparing new defenses, suggesting tensions that could one day touch the borders. These soft murmurs of the wider world came like gentle waves, shaping the horizons of medieval royalty with a steady, contemplative rhythm. Nothing arrived all at once. Everything arrived in slow, thoughtful intervals, leaving time to listen, to consider, and to understand. And while history today often highlights the grandeur of wars and the drama of political upheaval, the daily life of a medieval ruler was far quieter, filled with long councils, soft-spoken negotiations, and the unending effort to maintain harmony in lands that were always on the edge of change. It was in these measured hours spent weighing resources, listening to disputes, discussing alliances, that the heartbeat of the medieval world lived. Calm, patient, and deeply human. Beyond the palace walls, the ordinary people who depended on the crown lived their lives within a similar rhythm. The sound of hooves on a muddy road, the soft laughter of children playing near fields, the ringing of anvils in the blacksmith's workshop, and the quiet chanting of monks in a monastery chapel, all of these sounds blended into a gentle, earthly music. Royalty listened to this music from afar, knowing that their choices influenced the melody, but also knowing that the world had its own natural pace, one that rulers could guide but never fully control. As decades turned into centuries, the character of medieval royalty grew more defined, shaped not by sudden transformations but by the long, gradual evolution of tradition. Rituals that were once simple became more elaborate. Courtiers grew more numerous. Halls expanded. Documents and seals formalized what had once been spoken agreements. Yet, despite these changes, the underlying tone remained the same. A quiet dedication to stability in a world slowly finding its identity. In this way, medieval royalty became a living thread woven through 1,000 years, holding together lands, laws, and legacies with patient continuity. And now, as we reach the gentle end of this first long chapter of our journey, a chapter stretching nearly 1,000 measured words, across a soft and drifting landscape, you may feel the same calm that the early rulers once felt in their quieter moments. A sense that history, when told slowly and thoughtfully, becomes not just a record of the past, but a kind of soothing presence. A reminder that even the greatest eras in human history unfolded one still moment at a time. As we move deeper into this 1,000-year journey through medieval royalty, imagine the slow unfolding of the world around them, shifting gently into the High Middle Ages, a period where the foundations laid by those early rulers began to grow upward, like the steady rise of ancient stone towers. The world was still quiet, still patient, still carried by the rhythm of seasons, but it had begun to stretch ever so slightly. Roads became a little more traveled, towns a little more structured, and the halls of royalty just a little more organized. Their echoing chambers now filled with new voices, new duties, and new hopes for what the evolving centuries might bring. Where the early medieval era felt like the soft dawn of a settling world, the High Middle Ages glowed like a gentle afternoon sun, steady, warm, and quietly expansive. In these centuries, royal courts became places of both governance and gathering. The long wooden tables where advisors once sat in small, hesitant clusters now grew more crowded as scribes, heralds, and counselors took their seats, each contributing a slow and thoughtful stream of ideas. The air carried a soft undercurrent of parchment and ink, the faint scent of wax seals warmed by nearby candles, and the low murmur of voices discussing matters that required both patience and care. Yet even with these added layers of activity, the overall feeling remained unhurried, as though every decision still needed time to steep, like leaves settling slowly into a pot of gently heated water. Across the royal chambers, the architecture itself began to shift in subtle ways. Stonework grew more refined, windows stretched slightly taller, and tapestries grew richer in detail. Scenes that once depicted simple stories of ancestors now displayed long histories of alliances, significant oaths, and the quiet triumphs that helped shape the growing identity of each kingdom. Every thread, woven by patient hands over countless hours, reflected not just artistry, but the thoughtful pace of a world where truly nothing happened in haste. And royalty, surrounded by these symbols of continuity, found themselves more deeply connected to the legacies they were expected to uphold. Beyond the walls of these courts, the changing world brought gentle ripples of transformation. Markets became a touch larger, filled with soft chatter, the subtle clinking of pottery, and the distant calls of traders offering goods brought from regions just a little farther than before. Monasteries, once isolated in rugged landscapes, expanded their libraries and quietly preserved knowledge that had traveled through many hands. Villages grew, slowly, sometimes merging into the beginnings of small towns, their people united by shared traditions, seasonal festivals, and the steady presence of a ruler whose influence touched their lives with a quiet but recognizable constancy. For royalty, these changes meant new responsibilities, but also new opportunities for reflection. While their ancestors had spent much of their energy stabilizing kingdoms born from uncertainty, these rulers found themselves shaping cultures that were beginning to settle. Laws grew more consistent, trade more predictable, and relationships between neighboring realms more structured. Yet with this structure came a new layer of complexity, one that required rulers to weigh long-term decisions with even greater care, knowing that each choice could echo softly across decades, influencing not just their own reign, but the lives of those who would follow long after their voices fell silent. Imagine a king or queen standing beside a tall window, the faint glow of afternoon sunlight drifting across polished stone, warming the cool air around them. They might watch distant workers tending fields, hear the muffled sounds of horses moving through the courtyard, or listen to the soft shuffle of scribes preparing documents behind them. These sounds, subtle and familiar, provided reassurance the kingdom was alive, functioning, steady, yet they also served as a reminder of the quiet weight placed upon their shoulders, a weight carried not through displays of grandeur, but through thoughtful decisions made in long stretches of contemplative silence. Diplomacy, too, began to take on a more nuanced form. Rulers corresponded with neighboring leaders through carefully written letters, each word chosen with patience to preserve peace or cultivate alliances. Messengers traveled for weeks, sometimes months, to deliver these scrolls tied neatly with wax and ribbon. When replies eventually returned, they often carried the soft marks of weather-faded ink, cracked seals, or slightly worn edges, quiet reminders of the distances crossed and the time required for communication in a world still moving at the pace of human endurance. Royalty understood this slowness, embraced it, and built their strategies around it, allowing thoughtful diplomacy to become a defining feature of their rule. Within their families, life, also, unfolded with a calm deliberateness. Children of royalty were taught lessons in reading, faith, governance, and courtesy, all delivered with gentle repetition and steady guidance. Tutors spoke softly, encouraging understanding rather than memorization. The young heirs grew into their roles, gradually, shaped by daily routines, moments of quiet observation, and the subtle realization that they were part of something larger than themselves. They learned that leadership was not a sudden transformation but a slow awakening, a realization that took years to settle fully into the heart. Each passing year deepened the connection between rulers and the land they governed. Seasonal cycles brought familiar patterns, planting in the soft breeze of spring, tending fields beneath the warm quiet of summer, harvesting in the golden calm of autumn, and preparing for long winters marked by the crackling comfort of hearth fires. These rhythms grounded royalty, just as they grounded commoners, creating a shared experience that connected all people within the kingdom. Even the most powerful rulers could not escape the turning seasons, and perhaps it was this shared dependence on nature that lent the medieval world its gentle sense of unity. As the High Middle Ages settled more deeply into its stride, the sense of gradual expansion continued to unfurl like a long, quiet breath released over many centuries. This was not an age marked by sudden transformation, but one shaped by the slow layering of customs, responsibilities, and expectations that evolved gently from one generation to the next. Royalty, ever aware of the delicate balance resting upon their shoulders, approached these changes with the same measured patience that had guided their ancestors. Yet beneath that patience lay a subtle awareness that the world, though still soft and steady, was growing more connected than before, its threads reaching outward in ways that brought both opportunity and quiet uncertainty. In royal courts, this shift could be felt most clearly in the rising presence of scholars, scribes, and counselors whose roles expanded as the administrative needs of the kingdom grew. Their work, though calm and methodical, shaped the structure of the realm with a precision that had not existed in earlier centuries. Parchment rolled across tables in long sheets, carrying carefully inked notes that detailed taxes, trade routes, legal matters, and records of disputes that required the king or queen's gentle but firm guidance. The soft scratch of quills became a familiar accompaniment to the low hum of conversation, creating a steady rhythm that echoed through the halls like the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. The royal chambers reflected this growing complexity as well. Libraries expanded, filled with manuscripts, copied by patient monastic hands. Maps grew more intricate, showing rivers, forests, villages, and distant trade paths that helped rulers understand the shifting patterns of the world beyond their own borders. These rooms, once quiet spaces illuminated by a single candle, now glowed with the warm and steady light of multiple lamps, their flickering flames dancing gently across shelves, scrolls, and delicate works of craftsmanship, gifted from both near and far. Yet even as knowledge grew, the pace of life remained slow, guided by the understanding that true wisdom required time to observe, time to listen, and time to consider. The landscape beyond the palace walls mirrored these changes with its own soft evolution. Small markets blossomed into thriving trade centers, their sounds rising like muted waves, merchants speaking in gentle barter, the clinking of goods being unwrapped, the shuffle of animals and wagons moving across worn paths. Villages that once felt isolated now received visitors from neighboring regions, bringing unfamiliar accents, new stories, and goods that carried the faint scent of lands beyond the horizon. This quiet blending of cultures did not happen overnight. It drifted slowly into the lives of medieval people, like the steady glow of dawn spreading gently across a sleeping field. For rulers, this growing interconnectedness required new forms of leadership, forms rooted not in swift action, but in careful contemplation. A decision made too quickly could unsettle the delicate balance between neighboring realms. A misunderstanding could echo for years, carried slowly through the web of relationships built over generations. And so royalty continued to rely on long councils filled with thoughtful voices, weighing every possibility with the gentle precision that had become their most valuable tool. Each advisor, from the seasoned noble to the quiet scholar, added their perspective to the slow and deliberate shaping of the kingdom's future. Diplomatic marriages played a significant role in these centuries, weaving ties between distant lands with soft threads of shared lineage. When a royal child left their home to join another court, the journey was filled with ceremony, but also with a thoughtful quiet, as though everyone understood that such unions carried weight beyond the celebrations. These marriages were not rushed or taken lightly. They were the result of years of discussion, letters exchanged with care, and mutual agreements shaped by both trust and the hope of enduring peace. For the young princes and princesses involved, these commitments often marked the beginning of their own slow journeys into the world of leadership, teaching them the delicate art of balance that would one day define their reigns. Meanwhile, the natural world persisted in its steady, unhurried rhythm, grounding royal life in the same cycles that guided the lives of commoners. Seasons continued their familiar dance, spring bringing gentle rains and new growth, summer offering warmth, song, and the hum of activity, autumn shining with fields of gold and deepening shadows, and winter arriving softly, its cold air reminding all of the quiet endurance shared across the kingdom. Even royalty, surrounded by stone walls and guarded gates, could not escape these cycles. The turning of the seasons shaped their decisions, inspired their reflections, and anchored their reigns in the slow, dependable pulse of time. Letters exchanged between courts carried these rhythms with them, describing harvest successes, winter hardships, festivals, and quiet concerns that required mutual understanding. As messengers rode across long distances, their footsteps echoed the gradual pace of medieval diplomacy, never rushed, never frantic, always guided by patience. When a letter arrived, its seal carefully unbroken, the moment often carried a sense of gentle anticipation. Rulers unrolled the parchment slowly, aware that the inked words before them represented not just information, but the voice of another realm reaching across time and space to maintain connection. Within their personal lives, royalty continued to find solace in quiet moments that rarely appeared in the preserved pages of history. A king walking alone through a garden at dusk, listening to the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a cool breeze. A queen sitting beside a hearth, her eyes reflecting the glow of firelight as she read from a manuscript copied by monks in distant monasteries. Children chasing each other through courtyards bathed in morning light, their laughter softening the stern lines of their tutor's expressions. These moments, though small, shaped the character of medieval royalty just as powerfully as any decree or treaty. They were the gentle, human threads woven through the tapestry of leadership, adding warmth to lives often defined by responsibility. And through all of this, the world remained steady in its slow turning. The centuries stretched forward like a long, quiet road, each step guided by the careful rhythms established by the rulers who came before. The High Middle Ages, with all its subtle transformations, brought a deeper sense of structure to royal leadership, a structure that would support the reigns of future kings and queens as the medieval world continued its peaceful, unhurried journey toward the next chapter of its long millennium. As the High Middle Ages continued its slow and deliberate unfolding, the royal courts of Europe settled into rhythms that had become almost ceremonial in their steadiness. Every action, no matter how small, seemed guided by a sense of continuity that stretched backward through the generations like a quiet, unbroken thread. The lives of kings and queens took shape through patterns that repeated year after year. Councils held at the same times, audiences granted in the same chambers, rituals performed with the same measured gestures that carried the weight of centuries. These routines, though seemingly simple, brought a gentle order to the realm, allowing royalty to navigate the shifting tides of responsibility with a calmness that mirrored the slow passage of time itself. Within the stone walls of royal residences, the atmosphere remained deeply grounded in this unhurried sense of purpose. The thick tapestries that lined the halls, woven with scenes of hunts, legends, and ancient battles, muted the sounds of footsteps and voices, creating a soft, cocoon-like quiet that settled over the palace. The stone floors, worn smooth by generations of movement, carried echoes that drifted gently upward before dissolving into the stillness. Every corridor, every chamber, seemed touched by the patient hands of time, each space shaped by countless lives that had moved through them with the same careful deliberation. The royal court, though a center of political and social activity, rarely felt rushed. Even moments of tension unfolded with a kind of slow gravity, as though the weight of tradition encouraged all decisions to be approached with caution. Ambassadors arrived on calm mornings, stepping down from their horses with quiet dignity, their cloaks shimmering faintly with the dew of early travel. They were greeted with respectful bows, led through passages warmed by the golden glow of torches, and brought before the monarch with solemn formality. Their messages, carefully crafted, often weeks or months in preparation, were delivered with soft, measured words, allowing every nuance to be absorbed and considered without haste. Feasts, too, reflected this gentle balance between ceremony and comfort. Long wooden tables stood beneath high arched ceilings, their surfaces polished from years of use. Meals were served in slow, steady waves, warm breads, seasoned vegetables, and simple but nourishing dishes that reflected the rhythm of the seasons. At these gatherings, conversation flowed in low tones, drifting over the gentle music played by lutes or harps. The soft notes lingered in the air like faint traces of fading dreams, calming the atmosphere and encouraging a sense of peaceful unity. Even the laughter that occasionally rose from the nobles' seats carried a softened warmth, never sharp or intrusive, blending naturally into the soothing mood that defined these evenings. Beyond the palace, the villages and towns of the kingdom echoed this same sense of gradual continuity. Fields grew in their familiar cycles, roads stretched quietly between settlements, and rivers carried their steady currents past mills that turned with patient, circular motion. Royalty often observed these rhythms from a distance, understanding that their own stability was deeply intertwined with the calm persistence of the land and its people. Occasionally, a king or queen would embark on gentle tours of their domain, traveling along winding paths that led through forests, over narrow bridges, and across landscapes untouched by the hurried pace of later centuries. These journeys served not only political purposes, but also offered moments of reflection opportunities to witness the quiet resilience that sustained their realm. In quieter moments, rulers found comfort in practices that connected them to the deeper, almost spiritual stillness of the age. Some sought refuge in prayer, kneeling before softly flickering candles in chapels filled with the scent of pinewood and incense. Others consulted scholars and philosophers, their discussions unfolding slowly over hours, each idea examined with the grace and patience that defined medieval thought. There were evenings spent beside windows where the moonlight spilled across ancient stone, evenings when rulers allowed themselves to drift into calm contemplation, their thoughts mingling with the faint rustle of night breezes that slipped through partially opened shutters. Perhaps the defining aspect of this era was its balanced understanding of time itself. The people of the Middle Ages did not measure minutes with the same intensity as later generations would. Instead, moments were felt through sensations, the warming of the day, the shifting of shadows, the tolling of bells, marking prayer hours, the soft fading of sunlight behind distant hills. Royalty lived within these rhythms and shaped their reigns accordingly, not through rushed decisions but through enduring patience. This deep respect for the passage of time helped preserve a sense of equilibrium in an age where change arrived gently, like a slow-moving tide. Centuries later, when historians would look back on this period, they often focused on wars, alliances, and grand events. Yet the true essence of medieval royalty, the quiet hours, the careful choices, the slow, steady weaving of relationships was found in these softer details. In the calm breaths taken before an important proclamation, in the silent moments spent studying a map illuminated by candlelight, in the soft footfalls echoing through a corridor as a ruler prepared to meet with trusted advisors. These subtle moments, though rarely recorded, shaped the heart of medieval governance. And so the High Middle Ages continued, century after century, unfolding with a serenity that seems almost dreamlike when viewed from the present day. Royalty moved through their world with a deep awareness of the past and a gentle hope for the future, carrying forward traditions that connected them to ancestors long gone. Their reigns, though separated by time and circumstance, shared a common atmosphere of patience, a peaceful continuity that allowed the medieval world to drift gradually from one era to the next. With each passing generation, this quiet legacy grew, forming the foundation upon which the later centuries of medieval history would stand. And as the long millennium continued its journey toward the dawn of a new age, the calm, steady presence of medieval royalty remained a guiding thread, soft, enduring, and deeply woven into the tapestry of time. As the Middle Ages moved steadily toward the later centuries of their long and winding course, the royal families of Europe found themselves navigating a world that was slowly beginning to shift beneath their feet, yet still quiet enough that each change came softly, like the gentle settling of snow, upon an old, familiar landscape. The courts of kings and queens remained places of ritual and rhythm, where every day unfolded with a calm predictability that brought comfort to those who lived within their ancient stone walls. Dawn would break silently over the castle towers, casting pale light across courtyards that had witnessed the quiet footsteps of countless generations. Servants moved through these spaces with practiced ease, lighting torches, preparing simple meals, and opening wooden shutters that creaked softly as they welcomed the morning air. This daily choreography gave royal life a measured grace, grounding rulers in routines that echoed the steady heartbeat of the medieval world. Within the royal chambers, the first hours of the day were often the most serene. Monarchs rose slowly, adjusting to the coolness of their rooms and the soft rustling of tapestries, stirred by faint breezes drifting through high, narrow windows. It was in these early, tranquil moments, before councils began and decisions demanded their attention, that kings and queens found themselves most attuned to the quiet weight of their responsibilities. They would sit by the soft glow of morning light filtering across polished wooden tables, reading letters from distant lands, or reviewing simple notes left for them by advisors. The script on these pages, written in careful strokes of ink, carried with it the calm patience of scribes who had spent the night working by candlelight, their quills scratching faintly in the shadows. Council meetings that followed were rarely hurried. Instead, they unfolded with a sense of thoughtful deliberation, each advisor speaking in calm tones, allowing ideas to settle gently before the next thought arose. Matters of land, trade, law, and diplomacy were discussed with the same slow, careful cadence that marked all aspects of medieval governance. Even disagreements, when they surfaced, were tempered by decorum, softened by the understanding that decisions shaped not just the present, but the long, unbroken chain of history, stretching behind and before them. The monarch listened with quiet attention, absorbing the words, weighing each perspective as though time itself were generous, offering space for reflection rather than pressure for haste. Outside the council chamber, the castle remained wrapped in its own peaceful atmosphere. The scent of hearth fires drifted lightly through the corridors, blending with the faint aromas of herbs stored in woven baskets or hung to dry in kitchens. In the great hall, sunlight passed slowly across long wooden tables, illuminating the grain of the timber and the subtle marks left by generations of hands. The hall, though capable of hosting grand feasts, often rested in quiet stillness during the day. A few servants polished goblets or arranged linens, their movements gentle and rhythmic, adding to the steady hum of everyday life. The floor, made of smooth stone, carried echoes that seemed softened by time itself, as though even sound respected the calm dignity of the space. Royal gardens offered another kind of tranquility, one shaped not by stone and torchlight, but by the natural rhythms of the earth. Paths wound through beds of herbs, flowering plants, and small trees, each tended carefully by gardeners who understood the patient language of growth. Monarchs and nobles alike found solace in walking these paths, listening to the soft murmur of fountains or the rustling of leaves touched by a passing breeze. The gardens served as a refuge, a place where rulers could let their thoughts drift freely without the weight of official duties. Many found inspiration here, allowing the peaceful sights and sounds to guide their reflections on matters of governance, family, or legacy. This sense of serenity extended even to the more practical aspects of royal life. Castellans, blacksmiths, cooks, and stable hands all worked within a system that valued measured skill over speed. Horses were groomed with slow, steady strokes. Armor was polished until it reflected the torchlight in soft, warm glimmers, and bread dough was kneaded with a familiar rhythm passed down through generations. Every task carried with it not just function, but a quiet pride, a belief that the kingdom's strength was built upon the steady reliability of those who served it. Such routines helped reinforce a sense of stability, giving royalty confidence that their realm, though vast and complex, was supported by countless hands working with patience and purpose. As nights fell across the kingdom, a different kind of stillness settled in. Torches flickered softly along castle walls, their flames bending gently in the cool evening air. The sound of distant bells marked the hours with a calming regularity, echoing across courtyards and drifting through open windows. In the private chambers of the monarchy, evenings were often spent in quiet conversation, soft reading, or contemplative reflection. Some kings and queens turned to illuminated manuscripts, pages adorned with delicate artwork and gold accents that caught the candlelight in warm glows. Others preferred to sit near windows overlooking the moonlit countryside, watching the faint outlines of forests and hills fade into the horizon. These moments, filled with silence and gentle thought, allowed rulers to reconnect with the deeper currents of time that shaped their world. Even when challenges arose, whether in the form of small disputes, questions of succession, or tensions with neighboring realms, they were approached with the composed steadiness that had become ingrained in the medieval psyche. Letters were exchanged over weeks rather than days, negotiations unfolded slowly and carefully, and solutions were crafted with deliberate care. This unhurried approach did not weaken royal authority. Instead, it grounded it, giving rulers the ability to make decisions with clarity and wisdom rather than impulse. And so the world continued its steady journey forward, guided by leaders who moved through time with a quiet awareness of the past and a gentle hope for the future. As the later medieval centuries unfolded with their familiar steadiness, the daily life of royalty continued to move in gentle cycles that seemed almost untouched by the passing years. Even the architecture around them contributed to this sense of continuity. Castle walls stood thick and unmoving, their stones darkened by age but still strong and deeply rooted in the earth. Staircases spiraled upward in quiet curves worn smooth by countless footsteps, while balconies overlooked courtyards where the same breezes had drifted for generations. These spaces carried with them the memories of earlier monarchs, echoes of voices long faded, faint traces of old conversations, and the lingering essence of decisions that had shaped kingdoms in ways both subtle and profound. Living within such surroundings reminded rulers that they were part of a lineage far larger than themselves, a long chain of responsibility stretching backward into the dim reaches of time. In these centuries, one could often hear the gentle clatter of wooden carts entering the castle grounds, bringing supplies from nearby towns. Merchants, dressed in simple yet durable fabrics, greeted guards with respectful nods before unloading barrels of grains, bundles of cloth, or crates filled with pottery carefully crafted by village artisans. The air carried the soft scent of hay, dried herbs, and sometimes the faint sweetness of freshly harvested apples. These deliveries, though routine, played an important role in maintaining the serene rhythm of court life. Every meal served, every garment worn, every candle lit was a reminder of the interconnectedness between royalty and the people who lived across their lands. It was a delicate balance, one maintained not through force, but through the quiet dependability that defined the medieval world. Inside the palace, kitchens, that same sense of calm purpose prevailed. Fires glowed beneath iron pots, crackling softly as cooks stirred broths and stews with patient motions. Bread baked slowly in deep ovens, filling the air with warm, comforting aromas that drifted through nearby corridors. The preparation of meals, though essential, rarely carried urgency. Instead, the cooks moved with the predictable rhythm of long practice, their actions reflecting decades of tradition. Meals for the royal family were simple yet nourishing, relying on the steady produce of the land root vegetables in the winter, fresh greens in the spring, berries and honey in the summer, and nuts and grains in the fall. These seasonal patterns offered a quiet reassurance, a reminder that the earth itself moved in gentle cycles that no king or queen could hasten or delay. Elsewhere within the castle, scholars and scribes engaged in their own tranquil work. In small chambers lined with manuscripts, their quills scratched across parchment with soft, steady sounds that echoed faintly through stone hallways. These scholars copied texts, studied ancient writings, and recorded new observations in precise hand. Monks often travelled from distant abbeys to share knowledge, bringing with them carefully wrapped volumes, illuminated with intricate designs in gold and deep pigment. Their arrival was never rushed. Journeys took weeks or months, and their steps followed the natural pace of the medieval world. When they finally reached the castle, they entered with quiet reverence, carrying the wisdom of generations within the pages they bore. Their presence added a contemplative depth to royal life, offering monarchs glimpses into questions of philosophy, theology, and the natural world topics that invited the kind of slow, thoughtful reflection that defined the age. Knights, too, played their part in this tapestry of calm order. Though often portrayed as figures of action and battle, much of their daily life was spent in quiet training and disciplined routine. In the castle courtyards, they practiced sword forms with deliberate, controlled motions. The metallic ring of steel softened by distance and the surrounding stone. Horses were fed, groomed, and exercised with patient care, their steady breaths blending with the soft sounds of hooves on packed earth. Armorers worked nearby, shaping and repairing armor with rhythmic hammer strikes that echoed like slow heartbeats across the yard. These scenes did not speak of constant conflict, but rather of a lifestyle dedicated to preparation, discipline, and the preservation of long-held traditions. Knights served as symbols of stability, embodying loyalty and strength in a world that valued calm perseverance above sudden action. When the late afternoon sun drifted lower, casting warm golden light across the castle walls, another kind of stillness settled. Shadows stretched patiently across the corridors, and the sounds of daily labor softened as workers completed their final tasks. This was the time when royalty often retreated to private chambers or quiet balconies to reflect on the passing day. They might look out across the landscape stretching far beyond the castle fields, turning amber in the fading light, distant villages sending thin trails of smoke into the air, and forests darkening as evening approached. These peaceful moments allowed monarchs to feel a deeper connection to the lands they governed, reminding them that their reigns were but brief chapters in the vast, ongoing story of their kingdom. Night eventually descended with its familiar serenity. Torches flickered along the walls, casting warm, wavering light that danced across ancient stone. Guards took their posts with calm awareness, their presence offering a sense of protection that allowed the entire court to rest without worry. Within the royal chambers, thick curtains were drawn, candles were extinguished one by one, and the soft rustling of fabric echoed faintly as servants prepared the room for sleep. Outside, the world grew hushed. Only the occasional call of a night bird or the distant rustle of wind in the trees disturbed the silence. It was during these quiet hours that royalty felt most connected to the long flow of time, aware that the night had fallen in much the same way upon their ancestors, and would continue to do so long after their own names had faded into history's gentle embrace. As the kingdom sank deeper into the stillness of night, the castle underwent a transformation that felt almost sacred. The busy murmurs of daytime faded into soft echoes, replaced by a deep, enveloping quiet that settled across every corridor and chamber. Moonlight filtered through narrow windows, casting pale silver patterns across the stone floors. The air grew cooler and more delicate, carrying the faint scent of burning tallow from the few remaining candles left to glow in watchful corners. It was in these late hours, when all the world seemed to breathe in unison, that the royal family often found their most peaceful moments. The weight of crowns and duties lightened, replaced by a sense of introspection that came naturally in the gentle hush of darkness. Sometimes a monarch would walk slowly along the battlements, wrapped in a thick cloak to keep the chill at bay. From this high vantage point, the world stretched out in quiet layers, fields shimmering faintly in moonlight, forests appearing as dark silhouettes, and rivers reflecting the soft glow of the night sky. The castle itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the sleeping court, its ancient stones absorbing and releasing the warmth of the day. Up here, rulers could let their thoughts drift freely. They pondered not only the affairs of their reign, but also the passage of time and the enduring cycles of life that continued regardless of human ambition. The steady sound of guards, footsteps pacing along the ramparts provided a comforting reminder that they were not alone. Loyal watchmen remained awake, ensuring the peace of the night remained undisturbed. Inside the castle, the libraries rested in quiet darkness. Shelves filled with manuscripts and scrolls stood like silent sentinels guarding the accumulated knowledge of centuries. The air was infused with the faint smell of parchment and ink, a scent that carried with it the presence of countless scholars who had spent their lives recording the events, beliefs, and stories of the age. Even when no one walked, their aisles, the libraries felt alive with memory. The moonlight slipping through windows cast soft glimmers on the edges of bookbindings, as though illuminating the unspoken promise of wisdom waiting to be rediscovered. These spaces held a rare kind of serenity, reminding royalty that no matter how turbulent the world might become, knowledge endured, steady and unbroken, across the slow drift of generations. Elsewhere, the royal chapel offered its own quiet refuge. Candles flickered before simple wooden altars, their flames swaying gently in the still air. The carved figures of saints and angels watched over the dim chamber with calm, unreadable expressions, their forms softened by the shadows. Monarchs sometimes visited the chapel at night, seeking guidance or simply a moment of stillness untouched by the demands of leadership. Their footsteps echoed softly on the stone floor, and when they knelt to pray, the candlelight played along the folds of their robes like rippling gold. In that peaceful silence, rulers reflected on their place in the unfolding story of their realm, aware that their choices carried consequences not just for themselves, but for the countless lives entrusted to their care. The servants, too, found comfort in the nighttime quiet. After completing their tasks and ensuring the castle rested in order, they retreated to their quarters, small but warm rooms filled with the simple belongings that carried their world. They spoke in low whispers, sharing stories or quiet laughter, before settling into beds lined with straw and wool. Their lives, though humble, were woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. They cared for the people who carried the crown, maintained the spaces that held history, and upheld the routines that kept the kingdom functioning smoothly. Even in sleep, their presence shaped the atmosphere of the royal household, giving it a sense of humanity and continuity that no title or ceremony could replicate. Animals within the castle grounds added their own gentle rhythms to the night. Horses in the stables shifted softly in their stalls, their warm breath rising into the cool air. Dogs curled in corners near the guard posts, resting their heads on their paws while remaining alert to unfamiliar sounds. Even the birds that roosted in the rafters tucked their heads beneath their wings, offering a peaceful reminder that all living creatures found refuge during the night. These small details, often unnoticed during the busier hours of the day, became prominent in the stillness, enhancing the sense of calm that enveloped the entire estate. As time flowed forward, night after night, decade after decade, century after century, the lives of medieval royalty continued to unfold within these patterns of gentle routine and quiet reflection. The world around them certainly changed, borders shifted, new alliances formed, and innovations slowly took root, but the essence of their daily port-from-our existence remained grounded in these cycles of calm. The passing of seasons shaped the rhythm of the kingdom. Winters invited introspection and careful planning. Springs brought renewal and hope. Summers filled the land with soft warmth and activity. Autumns carried the steady promise of preparation for the cold months ahead. Royalty lived within these natural rhythms, finding meaning in the predictable retreat and return of light, warmth, and growth. Through it all, the monarchy stood as a symbol of continuity, an embodiment of stability in a world that evolved gradually, like the slow deepening of colors in a sunset. Each ruler inherited not only the physical crown, but also the quiet traditions that had guided those before them. The morning councils, the evening reflections, the ceremonial feasts, and the innumerable small rituals that gave shape to their days. They upheld these customs not out of obligation alone, but because they understood that such routines provided comfort and unity for the realm. A king's steady presence reassured the people in times of uncertainty. A queen's calming influence strengthened the bonds within the court. Together, they carried forward a legacy that was less about grand acts and more about the quiet persistence that sustained their world. By the time the medieval era matured into its later centuries, this gentle constancy had become its defining quality. Though history remembers the battles, treaties, and political shifts, the true heartbeat of medieval royalty lay in these tranquil moments, the the slow breaths taken beneath moonlit skies, the patient discussions held around wooden tables, the steady footsteps echoing through hallways worn smooth by time. These were the moments that shaped the character of the age, giving it its dreamlike aura and allowing it to drift through the centuries like a soft and enduring whisper. And so, as the castle walls absorbed the stillness of yet another night, the monarchy rested in quiet harmony with the world around them. Their lives, though, burdened with responsibility, were carried forward by the same steady currents that had guided generations before them. As the medieval world moved into the heart of its long millennium, the royal courts across Europe continued to drift through time with the same steady, unhurried grace that had shaped their earlier centuries. The lives of kings and queens unfolded like slow-turning pages of an ancient manuscript, each day written in soft strokes of routine, reflection, and the quiet rituals that anchored their existence. Even as subtle changes began to ripple through the continent, new ideas whispered along trade routes, faint stirrings of cultural shifts carried on distant winds. The heart of royal life remained deeply rooted in familiar rhythms. Dawn still broke with gentle light spilling across castle courtyards, candles still flickered in shadowed halls, and the faint echo of footsteps on stone remained one of the most enduring sounds of the age. Much of this enduring calm came from the physical spaces within which royalty lived. A world shaped by thick walls, heavy wooden doors, narrow staircases, and chambers lit by torches, whose flames swayed gently with the smallest breath of air. These architectural elements gave a sense of stability that was more than symbolic. The stones themselves held centuries of memories. The cold touch of the walls carried with it the weight of countless winters. The floors bore the marks of generations of boots, slippers, and bare feet, moving in slow procession. And the beams overhead, darkened by smoke and time, seemed to whisper faint stories of monarchs who had passed long before. Life within such structures encouraged a certain contemplative stillness, as though royalty lived not just in their own era, but also in the lingering presence of every age that had come before. Royal mornings often began with hushed activity as servants moved through corridors with soft efficiency. They opened shutters to let in the pale light, brought warm water for washing, and laid out garments sewn carefully by palace tailors, robes of wool in winter, lighter linens in summer, each thread representing the patient work of weavers who lived quietly in nearby villages. Breakfasts were simple and comforting, warm porridge flavoured with honey, fresh bread still steaming from the ovens, and occasionally fruit preserved through earlier seasons. These meals were taken slowly, in a calm stillness that set the tone for the day's responsibilities. A king or queen would sit before a wooden table, the flicker of a nearby candle casting soft light across parchment letters and neatly arranged seals, while the gentle hum of morning activity echoed faintly through the halls beyond. By late morning, courtiers, advisors, and emissaries made their way to the audience chambers, their footsteps echoing through long corridors lined with faded tapestries. These meetings rarely unfolded with urgency. Instead, they followed the methodical cadence that had defined medieval governance for centuries. Voices remained low and respectful, thoughts were presented with care, and decisions were shaped through slow discussion rather than immediate action. Even matters of diplomacy were approached with the same deliberation. Letters from distant realms were read aloud in patient tones, with each line considered carefully before responses were drafted. The distance between kingdoms, often requiring weeks or months of travel, naturally encouraged a gentler pace. Misunderstandings softened, conflicts delayed, and alliances approached with thoughtful caution. Outside the administrative chambers, the life of the court carried on in its own quiet manner. Ladies in waiting embroidered by the windows, their needles moving in rhythmic motions as sunlight played across fine threads. Musicians practiced soft melodies on lutes, harps, or small pipes, filling the palace with gentle sounds that merged easily with the peaceful atmosphere. Pages and young attendants hurried in careful, measured steps, mindful not to disturb the serenity of the halls. Even the guards, though vigilant, carried themselves with calm discipline, their armor gleaming faintly in torchlight as they held their posts with steady patience. The castle grounds, too, mirrored this tranquility. In nearby gardens, the slow work of tending herbs, flowers, and trees unfolded with predictable grace. Gardeners trimmed hedges with deliberate movements, watered plants from wooden buckets, and guided vines along stone walls that had stood for centuries. Monarchs often visited these gardens to walk among the greenery, their paths winding past fountains that murmured softly, or beneath archways covered in creeping ivy. These garden strolls offered brief escapes from the weight of leadership, moments where rulers breathed deeply, letting the scent of lavender, rosemary, and pine bring their thoughts into quiet alignment. Beyond the walls, the kingdom stretched outward in scenes of pastoral calm. Villages nestled among rolling hills, their thatched roofs clustered near winding roads that connected farms, mills, and small chapels. Smoke rose from hearths in thin spirals, drifting into the sky in slow, wandering trails. Fields swayed gently in the wind, whether golden with harvest or green with new growth. These sights formed the backdrop of royal contemplation, reminding monarchs that their rule extended far beyond the stone of the castle. Though they rarely visited distant hamlets, they carried the knowledge of these communities with them, understanding that the peace of the land depended on the quiet stability they worked to maintain within the court. As midday faded into afternoon, the castle settled into a subtle lull. Sunlight warmed the courtyards, casting patterns on the uneven stones. Animals rested in the shade, and servants took brief moments to breathe in the open air before returning to their duties. Inside, royalty often retreated to private studies or personal chambers, where they read manuscripts, consulted maps, or engaged in gentle hobbies such as weaving, sketching, or practicing the slow, elegant movements of courtly dance. These activities, though modest, connected them to the traditions of their lineage, customs passed down from one generation to the next through the soft language of repetition. Even as centuries pressed forward, the essential rhythm of royal life remained unchanged, preserving a sense of continuity that gave the medieval world its uniquely dreamlike quality. Time in this era did not rush. It drifted calm, steady, patient, moving from one moment to the next, with a softness that allowed every detail, every task, every breath to take its place gently in the unfolding story of the age. As the afternoon deepened, the castle's long corridors grew quieter still, settling into a tranquil silence broken only by the faint rustle of robes or the distant murmur of attendants speaking in hushed tones. Sunbeams drifted lazily through narrow windows, leaving soft stripes of golden light across the stone floors. Dust motes floated gently in the air, rising and falling in slow, dreamlike patterns as though time itself had grown drowsy. Within this peaceful stillness, the royal household moved through its late-day routines with a calm steadiness that echoed generations of tradition. Nothing was rushed. Every action, from writing a final letter to reviewing the day's messages, unfolded with an unhurried grace, as though the world outside the castle walls might wait patiently forever. Royal studies, tucked away behind heavy wooden doors, became the quiet sanctuaries of kings and queens during these hours. Here, beneath the warm glow of candles that burned low in iron holders, rulers turned their attention to parchment scrolls, illuminated manuscripts, and careful records of the kingdom's affairs. The smell of parchment, ink, and gently smouldering wax mingled into a scent that had remained unchanged for centuries. Even the scratch of a quill across paper carried a soothing rhythm, each stroke measured and deliberate. Advisors would occasionally enter with new documents or reports carried from distant provinces, bowing respectfully before placing the messages on carved wooden tables. Conversations were quiet and thoughtful, often drifting into contemplative pauses as the monarch weighed each detail with calm precision. Outside these chambers, the preparations for the evening meal began to stir softly within the lower halls of the castle. The kitchens, warm and bustling earlier in the day, now took on a steady, organized rhythm. Pots simmered gently over low flames. Bread cooled on wooden racks, its crust crackling faintly as it settled. Servants moved carefully between work tables, slicing herbs or arranging simple dishes on polished platters. The scents roasted meats, fresh herbs, warm bread rose slowly through the castle, carried in gentle waves that blended with the cool stone air of the upper floors. For many within the household, these aromas signaled the winding down of daily tasks, inviting a moment of quiet anticipation. In the great hall, long tables were prepared, with a simplicity that reflected the age's restrained elegance. Candles were spaced evenly, their flames flickering softly against the dimming light. Wooden cups and metal goblets were placed with careful precision, while tapestries along the walls absorbed the growing stillness of the evening. Before the arrival of the royal family, the hall often sat in a serene calm, touched only by the soft creak of settling beams overhead or the distant cry of a bird returning to its perch outside. It was during these peaceful moments, just before the gathering of courtiers, that the hall seemed to breathe an ancient, familiar breath that had filled the space, night after night for countless generations. When royalty finally entered, the hall awakened, but only gently. Conversations remained subdued, as though everyone within the stone chamber wished to honor the quiet atmosphere that had settled over the castle. The clink of utensils, the soft murmur of voices, and the occasional warm laughter blended into a comfortable harmony. Meals themselves were modest yet satisfying, reflecting the steady abundance of the medieval countryside. Roasted vegetables seasoned with herbs grown in the castle gardens, hearty stews simmered through the Maya afternoon, and bread made from grains harvested in nearby fields. Even during feasts, the overall mood rarely shifted from its calm and measured tone. There was a shared understanding that these gatherings were not moments of frenzy, but rather opportunities for thoughtful conversation and gentle companionship. As the evening progressed and the final dishes were cleared away, the hall gradually returned to quiet. Torches along the walls burned lower, their flames swaying lazily as though growing tired with the day. Courtiers bowed and withdrew to their quarters, their footsteps echoing softly against the stone before fading into distant silence. Outside, the world darkened into a peaceful stillness. The wind whispered through the trees that lined the castle grounds, and the distant sound of a river flowing beyond the walls blended into a tranquil melody that soothed both noble and servant alike. Within this complete calm, royalty often took a final short stroll through the shadowed corridors of their home. Lantern light cast gentle arcs across the walls, creating slow-moving shadows that followed their steps. These walks were quiet, reflective moments, times when a king or queen could let the weight of crowns and responsibilities lift slightly from their shoulders. The peace that filled the castle at night felt ancient, as though carried through centuries by every monarch who had walked these same hallways long before. By the time they reached their private chambers, the world seemed softened, slowed, and wrapped in the comforting embrace of medieval tranquility. And so, at last, the day's final quiet rituals began within the private chambers of medieval royalty. These rooms, lit by only a few gently flickering candles, seemed far removed from the noise and responsibilities that filled the daylight hours. Heavy curtains, often embroidered with scenes of ancient tales or family crests, hung still against the cool stone walls. The air felt softer here, warmed by the steady glow of hearth fires that crackled slowly, sending small sparks drifting upward before fading into the chimney's dark passage. A sense of protection and stillness settled across the room, as though the walls themselves stood watch in ancient silence, guarding the royal family during the vulnerable hours of night. Attendants moved quietly, their steps barely audible on the thick woven rugs laid across the stone floors. They spoke only when necessary, and always in gentle tones, mindful not to disturb the calm that the evening had brought. They prepared the royal bed with careful hands, smoothing linen sheets, adjusting quilts filled with feathers, and placing soft wool blankets folded with meticulous precision. Each motion was slow, deliberate, and respectful, honoring the unbroken tradition of service passed from one generation to the next. Even the smallest action, setting down a pitcher of water, adjusting a curtain, extinguishing one candle, while leaving another, held a certain grace, as though performed in harmony with the quiet rhythm of the night. Near the hearth, a monarch might spend a few final moments in thought, seated in a carved wooden chair polished by the touch of countless predecessors. The firelight danced across their features, softening the lines carved by years of leadership. In these rare moments of solitude, rulers often reflected on the day's events with a clarity that daylight rarely offered. Challenges that had seemed weighty hours before now faded into gentler shapes, softened by the hush of the evening. Decisions that required courage felt easier to face when wrapped in the calm glow of a dying fire. Even the responsibilities of a kingdom, lands stretching far beyond the horizon, people living in distant villages, armies stationed on distant frontiers, felt somehow quieter, as though the night itself offered reassurance that the world could wait until morning. Sometimes, soft conversation filled the room as a spouse, advisor, or trusted family member offered final thoughts about the day. Their voices blended into the tranquil atmosphere, weaving through the air like low, soothing melodies. The room's warmth and dim light made every word feel gentler, every concern easier to bear. Once the conversation ended, silence returned, not an empty silence, but a peaceful, comforting one that embraced the room like a warm cloak. It was in that silence that rulers found the strength to rest, knowing that even the burdens of crowns could be set aside for the night. Outside the chamber windows, the castle grounds settled into deep stillness. The moon, high above the battlements, cast silver light across the fields and rooftops. Within the walls of the keep, torches along the corridors burned low, their flames shrinking with each passing moment. Guards patrolled the outer walkways at a steady, unhurried pace, their armor softly clinking in the darkness. Far below, the village surrounding the castle had already succumbed to the embrace of sleep, with only the distant bark of a late wandering dog or the faint creak of a wooden shutter shifting in the wind. All else lay quiet, wrapped in the serene breath of nighttime. Finally, when the last tasks were completed, the attendants withdrew, bowing with silent respect before closing the heavy wooden doors. Behind them, the chamber grew still. The monarch approached their bed, the linens crisp and cool to the touch, the blankets warm and inviting. As they slipped beneath the covers, the world beyond the chamber seemed to drift farther away, softened into a gentle hush. The fire near the hearth crackled one last time before settling into a slow, glowing ember. Candle flames wavered, casting long shadows across the floor before eventually going still. Within this sanctuary of darkness and warmth, the ruler allowed their eyes to close. The weight of crowns, the demands of statesmanship, the endless decisions and responsibilities all dissolved slowly into sleep's quiet tide. The night offered a rare gift, the chance to breathe deeply, to rest fully, and to find peace in a realm untouched by politics, conflict, or duty. And so, wrapped in the gentle calm that had settled across the ancient castle, the monarch drifted into dreams, carried softly on the silent wings of the medieval night. And so, as our long and quiet journey through 1,000 years of medieval royalty gently comes to its end, the echoes of their world begin to fade softly into the night. The castles grow still once more, their stone walls holding centuries of whispered stories, distant footsteps, and the quiet sighs of kings and queens who lived, ruled, and dreamed within their ancient halls. The glow of torchlight dims behind heavy wooden doors, and the last embers of forgotten hearth fires settle into a deep, peaceful warmth. Across the vast stretch of history we've wandered through together, the thing remains unchanged. The calm rhythm of time itself, always moving, always carrying stories forward until they drift into memory. And now, as the medieval world settles into silence, you too can let go of the day, allowing the quiet rise and fall of history to lull you toward rest. If your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows, let it. The world outside can wait. The night is long, gentle, and yours to drift into. Before you fall asleep completely, I want to thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the past. If this calm, sleepy history helped you relax, unwind, or drift toward rest, please take a moment to like this video, because it truly helps the channel grow. And if you enjoy these soft, soothing explorations of history, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another bedtime story from long ago. I'd also love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight, so feel free to share it in the comments. Your messages always mean a lot. For now, let your thoughts settle. Let the medieval world fade into quiet dreams, and allow sleep to take you gently.